Hello and welcome to this special week-long virtual edition of CREWCONNECT Global. Whilst we're all really disappointed that we can't be together in person, we're delighted to bring as many of you as possible together through this digital experience. We've got a packed week of short, sharp and valuable content for you with something to digest every day of the week. But today we're focusing on big industry issues, and in just a moment I'll hand you over to John Adams to dive into the first session. But before I do, let me talk you through the format and the platform briefly. We'd love your interaction today, so please do use the Q&A and the chat functions on the right hand side of your screen to send your questions in, and the panel will do their best to get to as many of them as they can. And if you're viewing this full screen, you might need to minimize the window just to see the chat box. You can use this platform to find and connect with other attendees, so please do take a look and virtually network as best you can. And finally, I want to say a big thank you to all of our sponsors for this week. You can find all of their company profiles in the platform, learn more about their excellent service propositions and connect directly with them. So that's enough from me. It gives me great pleasure to hand you over to V-Ship's Managing Director UK, John Adams.
Good day, everyone, and in whatever time zone that you happen to be in. And this is obviously a global conference, so we know that you're widespread. But welcome to CREWCONNECT Global 2021. And as Chris has said, we're still virtual, but we still have a great program together. In addition to getting this great industry panel together to continue our discussion from last year and take stock of the COVID and crewing situation in our industry, we'll also have top-line discussions starting tomorrow, day 2, and Torbjörn Eid of Klaveness, who has chaired CREWCONNECT Europe and contributed to this conference, will lead another industry panel on recruitment and retention. On day 3, Dito Borromeo will raise the Philippines flag for our Philippines focus, and I would like to say to all our Philippines colleagues, Magadang Umaga, Manga Binabini Agina O, and I really look forward to be able to saying that to all of you in person in 2022. And then in day 4, we have another industry leader when Tommy Olofsson gives a keynote address on safety and training with another group of subject matter experts. And then on Friday, I'll be back, as they say, and that I'll be chairing a panel discussion on crew welfare and well-being with a group of people I've worked with earlier this year who I know care deeply about this subject. So now to day 1, and we're conscious of the fact that we have a limited amount of time. We have just less than 1 hour now to get into the panel discussion. And as I say, really pleased to have this top lineup of speakers from last year. No big introductions this time, but just going straight into the discussion. We do have Steve Cotton of ITF, we have Guy Platten of ICS, we have Andres Norces of the Danish Maritime Authority, we have Belal Ahmed from IMEC, and we have Captain Fauzi Fradi from Colombia. So without any further ado, let's get into the discussion. I'm going to ask each of them in the order that I've just listed them, to give a 2-3 minute take on the situation. We all know we've been living through this the last 20 months plus. You know, it really has been a wake-up call for our industry, what we've had to work through, and really give a new focus on our seafarers. So one that was perhaps overdue in many cases. But let's come to our first panelist in this run-through, and I'd like to hand over to Steve Cotton of ITF. Steve, give us your views of the world and how you're currently seeing the situation. The floor is yours.
Thanks, John. And just to echo your words, very, very sad that we can't all be together. Last year, when we thought we were in the middle of the crisis, that we could start to get back to a bit of normal, and it's taken a lot longer than we hoped for. But I think, first, maritime has been shown throughout the world's media and the economies to be utterly critical. I think the role of the 1.9 million seafarers has been brought to the fore, and perhaps that's good news for many of our seafarers and many of the companies that are represented today. I think the exceptional work of the shipping industry and the seafarers that serve it also has to reflect on the reality that we have had humanitarian and a safety crisis for, let's say, our seafarers. And despite the maritime industry having some very strong legislation, international legislation, through both the International Maritime Organization and the International Labour Organization, many of those rules and regulations have come under duress through this period. And we've seen a record number of abandonments. And again, shamefully, we've seen governments not allowing their port authorities, their medical services, to respond to seafarers' medical issues. But I don't want to be completely negative, because I don't feel 100% negative. I think the fact that shipping has come to the forefront has allowed us to work with many of our colleagues we're going to hear from in a moment. And we have worked throughout this period very closely on a number of joint initiatives. And when we asked for seafarers to be given key status, this was about receiving the freedom to move from one country to another across border, and actually priority access to vaccinations. The Neptune Declaration for Seafarer Wellbeing and Crew Change has seen over 850 organisations sign up, and together with the industry, we've delivered a human rights due diligence model. But I think we should reflect on what happened, how it happened, and try to continue to campaign together to get vaccines. It's very clear that we're very dependent on the global south, and countries like our friends in the Philippines, India and Indonesia, just to name some of them, have been disadvantaged when it comes to bidding and securing the opportunity to get vaccinations for their seafarers. So we, together with many of our colleagues on here, have been in conversations with the World Health Organization about recognizing more than just the short list of vaccinations and looking for standardized certification. It's totally unacceptable that a seafarer can have to have multiple jabs to make it to our shortlist. But I think in the bigger picture, and John's in Glasgow and I had privilege to be up there for COP26, the opportunity of collaboration on these serious issues and what does the future of our industry look like, from the human element, but also what's going to happen to zero carbon shipping, has shown us that there must be the ability to have a conversation and work together. John, I'm acutely aware of time and I'm very keen that we get a lot of questions, but I think collaboration was the key. We're not through yet. We have to continue to lobby and push, but we're much more powerful in the maritime industry. We have the workers, the employers, and some of those governments that have supported us continue to lobby the UN system. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. And a number of great points there, but I'm going to resist the temptation of getting into questions now, and we'll get back to those. So continue round our lineup here. Guy Platten, if I could come to you next from ICS, how are you looking at the situation?
Yeah, thank you very much, John. And once again, it's really great to be here. Hope we get some good discussion and some good questions as well. Just to echo really what Steve said, you know, all the points he makes are really valid, and I do agree with them. It's been an incredible 18, maybe coming up to 20 months now since we first started, this really first started kicking off in February, March 2020. And we've seen unparalleled levels of collaboration between social partners, between employers, and also with the UN bodies. And we've had great sort of strides forward there with the IMO, the ILO, and others as well. And it's the problem has been a lot of these countries not really recognising that seafarers as key workers. There's been some notable exceptions, Denmark being one of them as well, and we'll hear from Andreas shortly. But it's still increasingly number of countries which still make it extremely difficult for us to do crew changes, and this really does need to change going forward. We're seeing now as well with the surge of the fifth wave or the fourth wave, whatever it is in Europe, that we're having some travel restrictions imposed on people coming from Europe to other places around the world. And once again, there's always a danger that our crew, our transport workers, become the collateral damage in this. And that's the biggest lesson we must take out of this pandemic, is never to let that happen again. And actually to try and connect with those parts of government which are beyond the transport ministry, because that's been one of our issues going forward. I think we still have issues with some charterers as well, imposing very difficult conditions in order to do crew changes. That needs to change despite the Neptune Declaration. We also, you know, on a much more positive note as well, we've had unparalleled media attention on our industry. There was a big article in the Washington Post this weekend. We had an op-ed in the New York Times last week, and all around Europe and around the world, we've had very good coverage of the plight, unfortunately, not always to some effect. But I think we did make progress. We went from 400,000 seafarers well above their contract left towards the end of 2020, and we are at least managing the situation. But until we can get the rollout of vaccines, until we can reduce the bureaucracy of travel, to make it a lot easier. We've still got a real issue on our hands going forward. So I'll hand you back on that, John, so we can hear from the others. But thank you.
No, thank you, Guy. Again, great scene setting, helping fresh in our minds these issues. So thank you very much for that. And as you say, moving swiftly along, we'll come to Andreas Northseth from the Danish Maritime Authority, and we're really pleased you could join us again, Andreas. I suppose I should say, in the global nature of this business, you're not calling from Denmark, you're calling from Indonesia. So again, the global reach is there. So Andreas, the floor is yours. How are you looking at the world?
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and thank you for inviting me once again. Well, I can just echo what both Stephen and Guy just mentioned. I would say there has been historical, challenging 20 months that we have passed through. But I think, though, that when initially looking back, we had a situation where seafarers could not get off anywhere in the world, and then we actually found solutions. And I think also, as Guy mentioned, there has been a very strong cooperation, very good dialogue between the international associations, ITF, ICS, and IMO, ILO, etc. But I think we should not forget that also there has been a fantastic cooperation between, I would say, public authorities and private companies. And also within the public authorities, we have seen foreign affairs leaning much more into helping shipping and the crew in different cases. At least that's what we have seen in Denmark. So I think that on the positive side, we have seen a degree of cooperation which I have never experienced before. It's still very much handheld solutions. There's no open travel for seafarers as such, but it is possible actually to have seafarers change. You can have seafarers coming to many ports in the world, and you can also have seafarers going home from many ports in the world. But it's still very, very important to have a very close cooperation between both the authorities and the private companies. We can hope that many more countries will do like we've done in Denmark. We made a corridor where you can fly seafarers into our main airport, Copenhagen, and from there you can sort of divide them into Europe. We can hope that there will still be more of that kind of solutions. I think that there's no doubt. I think that for a long period into 2022, we will still see a lot of challenges. I think that there's one issue that we should also remember here, and that is that one thing is to have seafarers flying out and flying home, but we've seen also a concerning number of cases where seafarers that fall ill, and maybe serious illness, that they cannot be allowed to get to come ashore. So this is something that I definitely think that we still need to work very hard with. There's still many challenges. It has improved, but there's still many challenges. Just one thing, Stephen mentioned it, and I think that a big challenge that we are in for now is the recognition of vaccine certificates. Now, many places in the world, we're moving into third jab, so there will be something about vaccines, international vaccines. You get different kind of jabs, and we need to find a solution, I would say, in the early 22. How can seafarers actually document that they are sufficiently vaccinated? And that's something that we need to look at as well. So yeah, I look forward to the discussion. This is very much a COVID-19 perspective, but of course there are also other challenges that I hope that we can touch upon also. Thank you, John.
No, thank you, Andreas. As you say, we're still living with it, still trying to find our way through it. And a comment that just jumps to me, I must say, is you say some people ashore we now are getting to our third jabs or boosters, and yet the ICS figures that I know Guy will probably come on to later, 25 to 30% of our seafarers have been vaccinated. So quite a delta there. So let's move on to Belal Ahmed of IMEC. And I know that, Belal, you're involved in a lot of discussions and collaborations on this. So how are you looking at it currently? Over to you.
John, thanks. And good day, everyone, wherever you are joining from. I think all of us that we heard before, from Steve to Guy to Andreas, we are all thinking in the same line. While we started in mid-2020, when the crisis was at the worst, and towards the end of 2021, I can say Lord has been done and a lot has been achieved. But those of us who operate ships, obviously we are still frustrated enough to say that more could have been done. And the question would come, who could have done those extra things that would have made life easier, not only for the seafarers, but end of the day, the shipping as a whole. And I think it was mentioned earlier about the charterers, the governments, and obviously there are a lot of other industry bodies that we all work together but could not achieve what we really wanted to achieve. But I think we are in a better place than where we were before. For the first time, I think it has been mentioned before that we all work together, but I have these things in my mind and say, what happens when we have a next crisis? How do we really have to reinvent everything again? And how can we have a industry collaboration, probably once a year discussion that will involve everyone, not just ILO, IMO, and operators and ICS, the usual lot, but actually those people who benefit from shipping behind the scenes, such as the charterers and others. How can we have a common forum once a year to discuss that in the event of anything similar happening before, we don't need to find new rules, but we need to probably have rule book in place for us to work in future. Because what we have learned working with each organization that the meeting takes time, the understanding takes time. Then when it needs to be implemented, then we found the difficulties from the government side, from everywhere else. No, so I think that to me is something that we need to work on. Obviously, vaccination is the most important thing now, and I think myself and some of us were trying to work on COVAX allocation for seafarers vaccine program that I think until now we have not made much progress. So when we talk of Philippines and some other countries disadvantaged because they cannot bid same like the developed nations, and their seafarers are disadvantaged, not able to get vaccine, for which they cannot join a ship. I think these are the things that we probably need to work together. But I hope that today during these sessions for the whole week, we probably try to find a common ground where nobody who benefits from the industry tries not to contribute. We must find a way that everybody contributes. So with that in my view, that something will happen in this line. John, thank you very much. I think during the question answer, we'll be able to explain some of the things that we all have brought up.
No, thank you, Bilal. Thank you. Absolutely. We'll get that into that in the Q&A. But as you say, global collaboration, we've seen so much of activity there. We need more, and we need it to be continued. And those pain points around vaccinations, which I know is an issue that Fauzi Fradi is having to face in Colombia. I know I've had some technical issues, but are we able to go to you, Fauzi? Yes, we are, indeed.
Yeah,
well, again, and that I know you've had a few technical issues there which add to the stress, but please, the floor is yours. How are you looking at the world?
Thank you. Everything is fine here. Nice to be speaking again at CREWCONNECT Global. Indeed, yeah, these problems with vaccination are creating some issues for the seafarers. I fully understand that having seafarers as key workers has helped, but on operational side, we don't see really a lot of advantages. One of those problems we have is that not all the vaccinations are actually recognized everywhere by WHO, CDC, and so on. So that, especially, for example, the Russian vaccines or some of the Chinese vaccines, and that has also created some issues with the acceptance of the seafarers when they travel. Also, John, there is the issue with the tickets and flights. I don't really see from operational point of view that we have a lot of advantages from this recognition of seafarers as key workers. We still have issues to find flights to certain countries, especially like China, Australia, and these are also issues which we can discuss, of course, but yeah, they're there and we know about them.
Okay, Fauzi, just to say to you, Fauzi, I caught most of that. There was a little audio issue. I don't know if it's something on the headset, but I'm sure the guys in the back room here will help us sort that. But I did get most of it, and I know that, as you say, the ongoing vaccination issues and logistics issues are still here to challenge us. But let's get to some questions. I'll be looking out on the chat page here for anything that anyone listening in would like to post. And at this point, I should remind all of you, as I usually do at the beginning of these conferences, it is your conference. So all of you out there as leaders, any questions that you have, any burning issues, now's the time to seek some clarification or get some perspectives from this group. But there's a few things occur to me just listening to the panelists outlining the situation. I wanted to perhaps revisit something that we looked at in a previous discussion where we've talked about a roadmap to recovery, and the fact that, and I think it comes through in all of our speakers have been saying that we've learned to live with COVID. It hasn't gone away, right? I mean, the recent events in the last days in Europe tell us that it hasn't gone away. We've got to live with it. So how is it affecting our seafarers? What is it that the maritime, and we've heard about this in the collaboration, the maritime stakeholders have to do more of? Not to forget the fact that, I'll give a personal view just to encourage our panelists to offer their opinions, and we've heard the thread of this through the comments, as I say, but for me, some of the stakeholders that have let us down have been governments themselves and haven't stood up to the plate. And I know that ILO has tried to confront that to some degree. And again, that other large group of stakeholders, the charterers, the commercial part of our industry, we're servicing their business. Should they be more involved? So just on that, I suppose the question is, what do we need to have more from those groups in 2022 to keep us on a positive track? And I may go back round in just the order that we've been speaking. And Steve, if you'd like to perhaps offer some comments on that.
Thanks, John. Well, I think it's kind of critical, and you said it, if you're watching the news at the moment, the communication strategy for vaccines is not working 100%. So for us in the ITF, and we're not advocating mandatory vaccinations, but we are encouraging, let's put it that way, all seafarers to understand for themselves and their shipmates that they need to take the vaccine. So we need to secure a supply chain of vaccinations that are approved, and we've said, and we're on record, that Johnson & Johnson is the most appropriate because it's a one-shot solution. But we've seen some very good responses, and Andreas, thanks for your support in Denmark. You were one of the first to move quickly. Many of the European countries were a little bit bureaucratic, but have now rolled out vaccinations. But when we talk about living with this, we have to, and this is part of a question about securing seafarers for the short and medium term, secure vaccinations for the boosters for the countries that we depend on in the industry. So the Philippines, India. And we've done a lot of work. Again, we've worked with our friends at IMEC in Singapore. We've worked with the Singapore MPA. Their first initiative was a little bit too stringent and the restrictions were too difficult. Now it's up and running, and there is a real successful vaccination program with a target of 50 seafarers a day, approximately 185 Singapore dollars for each jab. We've also worked with the Qatari government, who are prepared to release some of their own Johnson & Johnson, and we're looking at how we can pilot, again in partnership with IMEC and ICS, to be in a position to roll out Johnson & Johnson jabs when the seafarers are transiting Qatar. So I think that conversation, which is sort of Bilal's objective, is how do we keep the profile that we've secured over the last 20 months, and how do we make, and let's be clear, we imagine there's going to be some serious financial consequences as a result of COVID and the packages put in place across the globe. How do we make sure people understand, and we mean the business ministries, the economic decision makers, that seafarers need to be part of the solution, and we need governance and we need to collaborate to achieve that governance. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Steve. Any follow-on comments? Guy, perhaps?
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, just to echo Steve, that's the lessons learned. Is how do we make sure that governments live up to their international responsibilities, and I mean that in the sense that, you know, the committee of experts found last December at the ILO, many governments chose to ignore their international responsibilities, and we've got to remind them that they're there. We don't need necessarily big changes to the Maritime Labour Convention. What we need is countries to actually recognise the MLC and actually abide by its stipulations. I think, as the committee of experts said, it was for these very crises that the MLC existed in some way. So I think, to me, it's how do we build on the collaboration, but also remind governments of their own responsibilities, and to make sure it's we can look after the seafarers going forward. I think Andreas mentioned about the medical care and other things as well. We had several incidents. You know, one time a Romanian captain was on board dead, unfortunately, for 5 months before his body could be repatriated back to his family. And that's just something which must never allow to happen again. And it is keeping the issue of seafarers alive in the public's mind. It's keeping up our sort of media profile in terms of reminding people, because this pandemic has still got a way to run yet. And I agree with Andreas, I think we're going to be looking at restrictions well into 2022. The issue of booster vaccines, Steve mentioned, that's really important as well. How do we secure sufficient supplies of that? There's no doubt. I mean, I've done a little bit of travelling now. We started, and the bureaucracy of travel is bad enough for someone like me, but for seafarers having to do it for their job, you know, it's still having to do PCR quarantining despite being vaccinated. These sort of things we need to address in 2022 if we're going to try and get back to some sort of normality.
Thank you, Guy. And just before I turn the same question to you, Andreas, that there is a question here which has been posted, which has been directed to you. Now, it's a broader question than just to Denmark, but it is, as it's posed to you, then I think you should have a go at answering this in the context of what we've been talking about with the role of governments. And the question is, India and some countries are responsibly addressing the seafarer issue. The question is, if worldwide governments are not listening, should the seafarers all over the world start an agitation for speedy action with Christmas and New Year around the corner? Now, this question is posed by Abdul Ghani Sarang of Nusi, and I know Abdul Ghani from many years ago, and I know that you're a very considered person. So for you to put a question like this forward means I sense a certain amount of intensity in the issue. But are you okay with that question, Andreas? Do you need me to read it again, or can you say it there? Do your best.
I will do my best.
So go ahead.
But I would say that I think that the seafarers, they do as a group have a voice from ITF, and I think also ICS very much have taken the voice of the seafarers. So I would not as such recommend an agitation as such. I think again that we need to maintain focus on the problems which is done very much by ITF and ICS and supported by many governments as well. Having said this, I think also that we should not forget that it's a super difficult situation and a historical difficult. I mean, for countries, and you can have countries that doesn't have vaccines enough for their seafarers, or have a very strict lockdown policy, and with no sort of options for opening to anybody. So and then how should they then handle a specific type of personnel? So it's super difficult. So I think the way ahead is what we have done so far. And again, looking at the past 20 months, we have actually seen progress. What I think is important is what Guy was mentioning. I think that we should very strictly enforce the MLC. And I can mention to you that in Denmark, and Denmark is not such a big port state, but we do have ships coming in, and if we during port state inspection see that they have crew that are past the 11 months, which is the effective period you can stay aboard, And if there's no plan, no flag state approved plan for how this crew should be exchanged, then we detain the ship until there's a flag state approved plan for when the crew actually be exchanged. And I think that this is something that all port should do, because it's any given ship. There might be a specific port where it's not possible to have an exchange of crew, but it's not all ports. It is actually possible within a reasonable time to arrange in a handheld solution for the crew to travel and to fly out, fresh crew out, and tired crew going back home. So I think that we just need to continue what we're doing, and then address the outstanding issues as I mentioned before, and Stephen also follow up on certification of seafarers, and try to see if we can push for a higher rate of vaccination of seafarers, which will solve a lot of problems, I think. But having said this, I still just think that we need to also tell ourselves that we are in a new normal, and for a long time moving ahead, I think that we still all have to face difficulties and bureaucratic procedures, PCR tests, antigen tests, short quarantine periods, etc. As soon as we travel abroad or travel to other continents. I fear that it will be a part of the new normal for all travelers, seafarers included.
Okay,
thank you,
thanks,
John.
Andres. I think we'll tie. I'm going to bring in Belal and Fauzi on this, but I'm going to link it to another question which has come in from Captain Andrian Eftimov of Stargate Maritime. And the question, I think it goes back to this demonstrating that you've been vaccinated. Now that there are an increasing number of vaccinated seafarers, but there are no new protocols for crew changes of already vaccinated seafarers all around the world, still requirements are PCR test, quarantine, self-isolation, which we know is strictly observed, and we know from our own experiences is a really complex situation with different rules, different places, and they seem to change frequently. So it is very challenging. I think the thrust of the question, if I'm doing it justice here, is that if we have more vaccinated seafarers, but perhaps these vaccinations aren't being recognized, if they and they're having to go through all these other strict processes, maybe as you say, Andreas. But maybe I'll come to you first of all, Belal, in the sense that, and you're wearing your IMEC hat. How are you seeing that situation developing for our seafarers?
I think, thanks, John. I wanted to bring something and very important from our point of view, and which is not the crisis itself. And taking clue from what Abdul Ghani Sarang was saying about all the suffering that the seafarers are doing, and obviously I also don't support any agitation. But what I wanted to bring up on the table is a lot of seafarers, because of this continued suffering, are not returning at the same number they are signing off and coming back to the ship. That's one. And they are not encouraging their children, or the young people are not knowing the suffering the seafarers are having. They are not enrolling themselves to be a seafarers. Now, this to me is a crisis that is brewing and is going to hit the industry very hard. And I think I am one of those generations that remember early 80s recession, and what followed is hundreds of thousands of seafarers left sea. And I believe that we are in a similar situation where a lot of seafarers will not come back, and we will be deprived of a lot of young, probably motivated guys who wanted to come to sea will not come. So I think industry should somehow look into this. And how do we make all these people who are supposed to take actions for seafarers movement and vaccination and all the thing, welfare and all the thing that comes. And I think today we haven't even touched about the mental health that is probably has worsened, much worsened than ever before due to the pandemic and the restrictions that we have now. So for me, we not only can be talking the same thing about what is being done and not being done, but I think we should look into future and think about this. How do we maintain the people that is at sea, and how do you attract people to come to sea?
Okay. Thank you, Bilal. And coming to you now, Fauzi, that this whole idea of having vaccinations verified and so on, I know that that's caused some issues for your group, but how are you looking at that?
Well, I think, John, that we need to look at really practical solutions here. I can share with you that I have a number of, for example, Russian officers who are asking if they can come to Europe just to get vaccinated with an approved vaccine and come back. So seafarers, they are just treated like any other passenger, and I agree with Andreas here. There are exceptions, though. You all have seen maybe how the Biden administration still gave exceptions for seafarers. If they are not vaccinated, they still can go to the US. And these exceptions or these measures, I think the US was a model country for seafarers. One, because it offered vaccination in several ports, most of the ports, especially with the Johnson & Johnson, which was really amazing. And two, also for the traveling. And we need, in my opinion, to really define where the problem is. And I feel that China remains a major problem for traveling. And then the second problem is the recognition in Europe or in any other countries about these vaccines which are not yet listed. So why these vaccines are not yet listed? This is maybe a scientific or political issue which need to be looked at. And two, how can we offer, maybe through unions, through ITF, through other support, how can we bring these recognized vaccines to the countries where they do not exist, for example, as a solution? Two, how can we increase the number of hubs where the vaccination of these recognized vaccines can be offered to seafarers on board? For example, Suez Canal, Turkish Straits, Panama Canal, the strategic areas where we have a much bigger number of ships going through, and there is time to provide this vaccination, for example.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to tie a question to you, Guy, which is it's been specifically addressed to you by Dennis Van Hansen, and the question is that the US has been leading the way in providing vaccines to international seafarers. I think we should all acknowledge that, but the documentation provided to support this is very poor. Therefore, can you share if there are any discussions on how to obtain better proof of the vaccinations already done in the US? Any comments on that, Guy?
Yeah, thank you. And yes, we are trying to do that. And I think it's not just a US problem, it's an international problem. I still can't understand why we have not got some sort of international standard of certification through the WHO. It really does confuse, not sort of, I've lost the word in my head now, but to me, it should not be beyond the wit in order to come up with some sort of international certificate quite quickly, because this is it's not just the US, there's other places as well where people don't recognise the various vaccine certificates. So some standardisation here is really important. And yes, we are lobbying very hard on this. We're having discussions with the WHO and others, and to continue with the US administration as well. So yes, we're trying our best, but we're certainly not we're a long way from reaching this consensus at the moment.
But just to stick with you then, and then from you, I'm going to link back to Steve. But it says a question here is kind of supplementary question from Janisos Christos. Is there any plan from IMO or WHO in order to give priority to seafarers' vaccinations worldwide? I assume that's very much at the heart of your discussions. But Guy, a brief word from you on that, then over to you, Steve.
I think there's certainly both the IMO and WHO have prioritised transportation workers and seafarers for the vaccine. So that's done. The issue is then countries themselves prioritising seafarers for vaccinations. And it's great that some countries are. The US was leading the way in this, making it available. But there's no doubt that that's there. But it is up to individual countries then to implement that. And we have seen some good examples, the Philippines, for example, and other places where seafarers are getting some prioritisation for vaccines. But still, it's a long way to go. And we still have to keep making the case.
Okay. Steve?
Thanks, John. I think, well, it's interesting to hear from Abdul Ghani about the frustration. And we got ourselves in some, shall we say, hot water in the middle of last year when we suggested enough was enough. And then to echo Bilal's concern, which we're also getting information from our unions and their members, that, can we say, the lack of respect or the frustration that 20 months in, we've got some good actors, but then we've also got not enough good actors. And what do I mean by that? So it's very clear to all of us, and I hope we get some time to talk about the future of zero carbon vessels, but seafarers are a pivotal part of our industry, and many of the people online are former seafarers. It's clear that the world didn't appreciate maritime and its part in the global supply chain, and it wasn't ready for a global pandemic. So our question is, what are we going to do about that? And I think, you know, I genuinely believe, and a number of us have discussed this in detail, that what does collaboration look like? And again, we had a very interesting day with a lot of senior shipping figures in Glasgow. How do we get to those decision makers in government? So transport gets us. How do we manage the economic part with the medical health parts of governments, so they understand that if we're going to build a more resilient global supply chain, the seafarers and the relationships from one nation to another are absolutely fundamental. So I think for us in the ITF, we want to thank the UN Secretary General, who we managed to get to come out on many occasions, but we've also seen, if we're going to criticise our own supply chain, I think we need to challenge governments on their connectivity between UN, maritime bodies and enforcement in a national level. So there's been some exemplar countries that have done great jobs, but there's also been a lot of countries that really can't separate themselves from national politics. And if you think about it, and you think about it in a basic term, seafarers have been delivering personal protection equipment, the ability to actually give the vaccinations and food throughout this period of lockdown. So I think we have a moment in time where we can get our message out, but it's like, what are we demanding? And how do we make sure the unique nature, and I'd say seafarers, but I would also include other elements of the global supply chain, are respected, because we cannot be in a position where people do not want to be part of the amazing maritime industry and part of a global community. Thanks, John.
Okay, I do want to talk about decarbonisation as well, but I want to save that for maybe the last few minutes. There's a couple of things I'd like to do here. One is I'd just like to acknowledge Abdul Ghani has posted another point here. I just want to acknowledge it about bonuses and extended contracts. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, Abdul Ghani. I'm not going to introduce that question here and get into a round of discussions. Perhaps that's something that we can take up in a separate forum, but I want to acknowledge the seriousness of the point made, and maybe we can bring that out in a broader point. But this is a finger on the buzzers round. I have one question. I'm just going to come to each of you, short answer to this very difficult question, so you have to be thinking on your toes here. Given all that we've heard about vaccinations, about government stakeholders, charterers, collaboration, extended tours of duty, mental health, the list goes on and on and on, 1,000 points of light and learnings from COVID. If I was to ask you, what was a standout lesson from when it started and through 2021 that will shape strategies for 2022 and beyond? And no, you can't have 5 points, just one thing that you say, that was the big thing we have got to learn from in COVID. I'll go for volunteers first. Anybody want to come in first? Okay, 2 volunteers. Okay, Bilal, since we haven't heard from you for a while, then Steve, then Guy. Andrea, you get a chance to think a bit longer. And we'll see if Fauzi seems to have had a technical issue, but we'll get back to him. Bilal, you go first.
Yeah, okay, John. I mean, earlier you mentioned, I think many of us here and those who are watching us are seafarers. And I think most people would agree that we are no nonsense guys, professionals doing our job. But when we had this crisis, the thing that I have learned, that the organizations, the governments, the bureaucracy within is so different, because they would, many meetings it was said that we are going to do it, we agreed, signed, and it's not done. Why it is not done? Because the bureaucratic nature of their process, they just simply, there's no one in the system to just override those. And that was a big lesson for me, especially to see that the moment something is agreed, which takes a lot of time to get to that point, and from there when something is actually implemented and allowed to be done, it takes a long time. And that was the reason I was earlier saying that can we have something in place for future that we don't lose this time and instead we get into what we really should be doing. So that was my take. A bureaucracy in the system really delays things.
The bureaucracy. Okay. All right, Bilal. Steve, I think you were next.
To reaffirm, our model is too fragile, and the strain and stress produced by the global pandemic says a subcontracted just-in-time model is not sustainable for the future. And we have to, and I think the key guide for all of us is we have to be frank, transparent, and we really have to take our collaboration to another level. And if we don't know what we want to do with our industry, don't expect governments, because they've clearly, sorry, Andreas, some have tried, and they clearly don't understand all the intricacies of our world. So we have to step up and take that space.
Very good. Guy?
Just to build on that it's collaboration is a lesson we need to learn, and how do we to look at looking after our seafarers going forward. I think the last 18 months has shown the importance of seafarers, and I think that, you know, perhaps we could all admit there have been a bit of a forgotten bunch of people. That's certainly not the case now, and we need to learn those lessons from the last 18 months, enhance the collaboration, and perhaps look at the way we do business going forward, particularly as we move into the decarbonisation agenda as well.
Thank you, Guy. And Andreas, you've had a chance to consider your thoughts. What are your views?
Yeah, but it's very much, and it's scary. You need to have more different people. We're thinking too much alike, everybody. Yeah, but it's very much, I would say, collaboration, and in particular, public-private cooperation. I think that I can point to a number of faults and problems that we're still facing. But to me, something that really has proven its worth, that is public-private cooperation, where we have responsible companies, responsible governments and authorities working together to solve concrete problems. And I believe that moving forward, because you asked how will this influence our strategies moving forward, I really think that we've seen for the past 20 months the value of having close cooperation on concrete issues. And I would also just hope that we can get seafarers, I mean hands-on seafarers, and with all due respect, Steve, not just the organizations, but also seafarers should be included in the solutions that we need for decarbonization and many other things in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we still have problems with Fauzi's connection, so I will bring him in when I can. If I may allow myself a comment on that question, that's and this is not to take away from all the good work that's been done with it, but I feel the other side of collaboration for me, that this crisis has highlighted the fragmentation in our industry, and I think we've got a lot of work to do there to bring so many stakeholders together, employers and fundamentally all the way through. I would say that. And I don't wish it to be overly provocative, but I would say that we've been a huge campaign, and I applaud everyone's efforts for seafarers to be recognised as key workers. We've got to ensure that we regard them as key workers within our own industry, and we provide the services and support to our seafarers from all employers, and given the full expanse of our business, and that from the best operators, we bring everybody up to a level that we treat our seafarers in a better way. But anyway, that's just a personal thought. To close out in our last remaining sort of 9 minutes or so, that we've talked a lot about increased industry collaboration, and that I'm thinking in terms of the next challenges where the maritime community would get together and to meet the next challenge. And if that's decarbonisation, which is certainly the major headlines that we're dealing with, COVID and decarbonisation. And decarbonisation is, as Steve alluded to earlier, in COP26, which was just out of my window here, where most of it was held, that big focus in the world on this. But how do you see us tackling this together as an industry, all that decarbonisation brings with it? And maybe I'll just jump the order a little bit and come to you first, Guy. What are your thoughts? Because you were obviously here, and that you had the Shaping the Future of Industry conference here of ICS. How do you see us working together towards decarbonisation?
One thing in decarbonisation and with our crews as well, we can't be doing these things sequentially. We can't get the technology in place and then look at how we can do the training. I think it's really important that we move together in parallel, and which is why together with ITF, IMO, ILO and the UN Global Compact, we're launching this Just Transition Task Force, and we'll bring in other stakeholders as we develop the concept further. The whole idea being that we move forward together on this journey, and we use this as an opportunity not only to upskill our existing seafarers, but also make this industry really attractive to a diverse range of people of all sexes as well, because we, I think 2-3% of our global workforce are female. That needs to change if we're going to really tackle the future together. So there's a real opportunity there, and I think, to me, that's the exciting bit of this now. We're meeting up shortly to see how we move this forward. But this just transition, and also make sure that the voice of the seafarer is heard as we do the decarbonisation, their concerns and their fears for the future, and how we can address them. So it's about engagement, it's about dialogue, and it's about looking at the training and the skills we need for a new, what we're calling the fourth propulsion revolution.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Steve, I'll come to you next. How do you see us working together towards this?
Yeah, so just to congratulate Guy on that conference, and it's difficult to tell when we're online, but many conferences start with a big attendance and fritter away by the end of the day. Well, it was a very intense day in Glasgow, and I think it will go down as one where serious decisions were made. Look, we know that we don't have all the answers to what the alternative carbon-free solutions might be, but to start off, and again, this is in a global picture, this is maritime leading from the front, to start off with a task force that includes working men and women, not enough women, as Guy says, and also to respond to Bilal about how do we shape the image of our industry to make it attractive to young people and more young females, is a job we'll have to look at as part of this process. But the reality is 2050 isn't that far away, and if we want to have solutions, we'll need ships operational by 2030, and that means we'll need to look at the whole training methodology, and we have to model and map, and we have to explain to today's seafarers what a green job is and what are the consequences for them. So there's a massive amount of work here, but listening to the debate at the highest possible level of the industry, including the IMO as well, in Glasgow, gives me confidence that something from the COVID experience has accelerated our ability to be frank with each other. And I know there's many of my colleagues from the unions online, and again, we're desperate to understand what all these alternative fuels are, how they will drive the ships of tomorrow, how we're going to deal with the ships of today, and those are things that can only be done together. And of course, unsurprisingly, we believe that we can define the social in ESG, and we can define what is a worker engaged, worker led just transition. So I think we start well. No one's excluded, everybody's included, but we do have to kind of coordinate ourselves in perhaps a very different way to be ready for this quite unique and again very different challenge. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Steve. I need to encourage our two remaining panelists just to try and keep the comments pretty concise. We do have to finish in 4 minutes, but Bilal, please, how do you look at it?
Yeah, thanks, John. I will keep it brief, and I will take the cue from what Guy was talking about. Training and the implementation of decarbonization must go parallel. And one of the things, John, you know very well, what we face is the labor supply country, or the seafarers from where they come from. They need a lot of support on training, not just on funding, but actually training institutions to be developed trainers to be provided so that they get properly trained. I think this is where the developed nations who owns the ships and the seafarers who come from mostly from developing nations, there must be connectivity with regard to how smoothly the training can be provided. I think that is going to be very fundamental in bringing the crew up to the standard that they need to be in order to run these ships.
Okay, thank you, Bilal. Thank you for keeping that really concise and focused. Andreas, are you still having sound issues? Are you able to join us?
I should be on again.
You're loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would say just like the others mentioned, that there's no doubt that we have to look into what kind of training programs do we need for seafarers in the future when we get the new fuel. But I just want to also point to the fact that there's a lot that can be gained without waiting for the new fuel. And this is an issue that I've tried to raise for many, many years, as you would know, John, that there's a huge potential in asking seafarers, what are your suggestions in becoming more energy efficient and more efficient in the way that we operate the ships? They have a lot of ideas that we can actually put into the operational model that we have. And I think that this should be an encouragement to all owners and managers to also include the seafarers' opinion in finding ways to handle the green solutions and the daily life. I mean, again, we're still pushing paper, and this is connected in some way also to the green agenda, because in the green agenda, there's a lot that can be done by having a much more efficient navigation, better route planning, and so on and so forth. And this is where the seafarers definitely play an active role. And if we include them, they will feel that they have a very active role, which again would make it even more attractive to join the industry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I really do need to move to wrap up now. Just in doing so, I would like to acknowledge the question that came in. It's just disappeared from my view a little bit, from Dmitry Gladkov about the Russian vaccinations. We don't have time to go back to that, unfortunately, but our colleague here, Fauzi Frauti, he can go back to this separately and share some views with you. I want to add my 2 cents worth to that last comment, this last topic that we're having, which is, yes, I think that upskilling of seafarers as we move into this phase, recognizing that in the eyes of the NGOs, the LNG is transition, even though there's a huge infrastructure around it, so a lot of changes we have to deal with. And at the end of the day, perhaps consistent with our discussions about stakeholders, we also need the IMO and the member states at IMO, because it's obviously an establishment of member states, have to help make the right decisions and have the right debate going forward. Otherwise, we're just preaching to the choir, and we don't want that Glasgow discussion that Guy and Steve were referring to be only that. It now has to be a call to action, and action has to come out of it. But I think that was a clear focus from there. I want to thank the panel. This has been a world-class panel. I'm sorry that Fauzi, we couldn't hear from you as much as we could have, but to Steve Cotton, ITF, Guy Platten, ICS, Bilal from IMEC, and Andreas from the Danish Maritime Authority, thank you very much. It's been a great start to this conference. I think it's got us off to the right tone, the right level of discussion and debate. And the next speaker coming up in the next session is addressing the human element in the new normal. So very much continuing this discussion. But gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to hand you back to Chris, the organizer at Informa. And I do hope next time we do this, it's in person. But thank you very much. Great to see you all.
Hi there, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much, John, and thanks to all of you for the discussion today. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to this first session of CREWCONNECT Global Virtual Week. We've got 2 great sessions still to come, as John alluded to, so please do stick around and watch those. Don't forget to browse through the platform, make connections where you can, and find some time to go and speak to our sponsors and see what they can do to help your business. Coming up later, we'll have Mike Powell discussing the rise of the codefarer, but next we're discussing how the shipping industry can address the human element amidst a new normal. So I'll leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Liang Wu.